Here's my homage to Count Magnus, one of the classic ghost stories. Everyone who has worked in libraries for any time knows that libraries are often havens of the lost. Lonely seniors, the unwashed, quite literally, and the unemployed, people filling in or wasting time. But they also know about library geeks, solitary young people who haunt the library even when they have no homework to do. Jim was a library geek. He spent every night in the main branch downtown, reading Colin Wilson books on murder, or the occult, or listening with earphones to Ravel's Bolero at the listening station in the Fine Arts Room, over and over and over again. There was even a rumor he'd listened to the library's entire opera collection. This was a geek indeed. None of the staff, not even the high school girls who worked as pages, and they were all girls back in the 70s, knew anything about Jim. He lived in an apartment with his mother, who was apparently a shift worker, and he didn't seem to have any friends. Tall, skinny, with glasses, Jim in his old green trench coat quickly faded into the background, so you forgot he was there. And so no one, at first, noticed he had begun using the microfilm reader, or what he was using it for. Every town has its dirty laundry, its secrets it never discusses, in public. In our town, it was a series of murders which took place in 1937. Late that summer, a black Hudson Terraplane sedan began cruising the back roads north of town during the hours of darkness. Canada was still in the grips of the Great Depression and had a high population of young transients working as farm or casual laborers. If a car passed a solitary young man walking alone, it would stop and a voice would ask, "Do you need a ride?" And the young man would never be seen again, at least alive. Later, parts of bodies would be found in both the lake and the creek, and it was eventually concluded that 5 young men had gone for a last ride in the long black car. Its driver was one William Magnus, who was hanged for murder at the old jail on April 15, 1938. Magnus was a servant of Dr. Francis E. Morrow, an eccentric doctor who committed suicide by throwing himself into the lake before he could be arrested. The slayings had no known motive. Magnus pled guilty and went silent to the gallows. Many believed the killings were sexually inspired, but the local whisper stream claimed the young men were victims of peculiar medical experiments, which had failed. No one knows how Jim learned about the case. No one spoke of it, and there were no accounts of it in any book in the library. But the original press reports were available on microfilm. Both the murders, the suicide, the trial, the execution. So he began to spend his free time reading yesterday's news. Jim bought a Hilroy scribbler and made notes. He had decided to write a book about the murders, with the proposed title, The Night Doctor. From the notebook. I doubt these were sex crimes in the usual sense. Morrow was a brilliant medical student, but considered a crank because of his theories. I need to find an MD to explain it all to me. But, as near as I can understand, he thought it was possible that individual body parts contained the spark of life, i.e., a leg could walk by itself, a decapitated head could retain consciousness, even think and speak. Is that what he wanted the farmhands for? Experiments? Were they guinea pigs? Jim tried to question his GP about Morrow's ideas, but was strictly told they were nonsense. The actual term the doctor used was sick, and he tried to discourage Jim's interest. It didn't work. Jim visited Morrow's old house on King Street, which backed directly onto the lake, providing an excellent place to dispose of bodies and related parts. Jim was actually caught trespassing in the backyard, which featured an old concrete dock, the homeowner threatening to call the police if he ever caught him again. Jim also found where Morrow was buried in the back corner of the local cemetery, and was observed by a classmate actually talking to the grave. "Oh, Doc, I wish I could have met you. How I would have liked to have learned your secrets. What exactly were you up to in that house on King Street? Putting your theories into practice?" Jim was already considered the school weirdo, and such reports did little to improve his social standing. As for Magnus, no one knew where he was buried, or cared. I often did my homework in the library's reference area. It was better than staying home. I had a few classes with Jim, so when I saw him at the microfilm reader, I asked him what he was doing. Some historical research, eh?" he mumbled, trying to brush me off, which only increased my curiosity. I kept bugging him until he admitted he was looking into the 1937 murders. "Wasn't that some sort of sex crime?" I asked. Maybe. Jim wouldn't say any more, but I did notice he was making notes in a blue Hilroy notebook. A few weeks later, I saw Jim talking with a few old rubby-tubs sitting outside a beer parlor on the Lakeshore Road. As I was passing, a burly middle-aged man came out of the bar, grabbed Jim by the collar, and yelled, "What are you asking questions about Magnus for?" I'm just doing some research," Jim squeaked. "Get out of here and mind your own damn business," the man yelled, shoving Jim around and giving him a kick in the ass that propelled him down the street. The rummy's raucous laughter filled the night. As I watched Jim slink away, I thought about asking him if he was okay, but I figured he might be even more embarrassed if he knew I had witnessed his humiliation. One night, Jim decided to walk the train tracks near his apartment and took a shortcut around back of the Canadian Tire store when he saw the car. The car. From the notebook. April 30th. I was behind the plaza when I saw it. An old black four-door sedan. On looking at the front, I was amazed to see the Terraplane logo. It was a Hudson Terraplane. I checked the tail lights, and sure enough, the year 37 was molded into the plastic. Might even have been the night doctor's car. It was huge, and I couldn't resist standing on the running boards when this gray man, gray hair, gray clothes, came out of nowhere and asked me to get off. He was polite, but it still freaked me out. Where did he come from? I watched him drive away towards the tracks, and it sure had a powerful engine. Guy looked familiar. Maybe he lives in the apartments. Later. The gray man was William Magnus, and he was wearing a gray chauffeur's uniform. I recognized him from a news photo. It's insane, but it was him. I just saw a ghost. After this, the entries in the notebook became increasingly paranoid. May 3rd. Car followed me home. First saw it on the Rebecca Bridge. Then it was prowling behind me along Queen Mary. Had to cut through the woods to get away. We'll stick to well-lit streets from now on. May 5th. It's following me up Kerr as well, even though other cars and people around, even though it's well lit. I had to go into a variety store and sneak out the back to get home. I don't want them to know where I live. May 8th. Looked out the bedroom window through the curtains, 3 a.m. Car parked on the street with Magnus looking up at my window. And there were things on the street or parts of things that crawled or hopped and looked wet, and a head, just a head, sitting on top of the stone fence. May 10th. They've been inside the apartment. Everything wet, and it stinks like the lake and like something else. Something worse. May 11th. I've spoken to him. He called just after midnight and explained all. He offers me immortality of a type, or at least parts of me, and before he hung up, he said in his cultured voice, "You said you wanted to meet me, and so you shall, very soon. I hope you won't find it a cutting experience." Oh my God, what have I done? May 13th. In the library. No place else to go. They're getting ready to close, and then what shall I do? Maybe I should go to the police. They'll think I'm nuts and put me in 999 Queen Street, but that's better than this. Magnus is sitting across from me, pretending to read a book. Torso by Marjorie Freeman Campbell. But he's really just staring at me and smiling. The diary ends. Jim's disappearance occupied the front pages for several days, but then the case ran cold until his torso, just his torso, washed up at Holyrood Park. The rest of him, including the head, was never found. The local police claimed Jim's murder was drug-related, but anyone who has read the Notebook knows it had another, and a supernatural, cause. So, how do I know all this? A staff member found Jim's Hilroy notebook on the floor of the Fine Arts room and put it in the Lost and Found without examining it. Later that summer, I had the opportunity of looking through the Lost and Found for a pair of missing sunglasses and recognized the scribbler. So I took it and read it and then burned it. And I never did find those damn sunglasses. The moral of the story? The devil makes work for idle hands.